times. Leading effectively in turbulence is as likely important a challenge on a human scale as recognizing the risks of climate change. This is more than a conference theme. It's a community challenge. It's a call to action to collaborate over the year, meet in Brussels, and share our results and views. There's more about the theme and the call for papers and the workshops and events in your conference packs. But don't stop there. Get innovative. Let's engage as many smart and creative people and stakeholders as we can over the coming year and make a strong contribution to the world by advancing leadership capacity in turbulent times. See you in Brussels.
Thank you, Patrick. Indeed, there is much exciting work to be done and accomplished, and Brussels next year is the place to share. We look forward to see you, and a warm welcome to Brussels.
We're almost there. We have a wonderful tradition of doing a conference weaving at the end of the conference, and this year we have a co-weaving, and I will be doing that with Ira Chalouk. Many of you know who Ira is. He is a board member, and he is a well-known scholar and practitioner in the area of fellowship. He is going to share his weaving in poetry, and I will do mine in prose. So we're going to end with a poem. The decision to return to Atlanta for ILA's annual conference in this particular year feels prescient, as does the theme, the dynamics of inclusive leadership. This is a time in which we are seeing a resurgence of fear and anger, as we have heard from many people at this conference, of prejudice and bigotry, projection and exclusion. The city of Atlanta has worked hard to become a place known as the city too busy to hate. Its beauty and increased diversity almost overshadow the painful history of slavery and the era of Jim Crow that followed and in some places still exist. But it had the courage to remember their whole story and that of others around the world, and they chose to share it in the Center for Civil and Human Rights. Those of us who marched or were bussed over will not forget the majestic rise of that regal building and those rhythmic beats of drums as we approached it. We experienced the warm Georgia hospitality from Janet Reckman and Deborah Richardson. The tour of the center took us to sites and displays that reminded us of why we must always know and tell our stories and never be silenced or imprisoned by them. The opening plenary began with a Rachmaninoff prelude that framed the welcoming remarks by ILA's president and CEO, Cynthia Cherry. She called our attention to the melody and the movements from harmony to dissonance and a cacophony of complexity, depth, and elegance, movement comparable to the significant shifts in our time, and especially in our field of leadership. She spoke of how globalization is changing our perspectives and our expectations and our boundaries. And she said that what is required of us now is the acquisition of a global mindset, global acumen, and the capacity to work with differences and diversity. Our first keynote speaker, A.J. Bramdio, the African ambassador to the European Union, spoke about inclusive leadership in real time, in a thoughtful, conversational manner, describing the corrosive nature that incivility can have on individuals and on communities. He shared that as apartheid was ending, their work was to talk about talking, learning to listen, and developing a process of engaging in dialogue. We heard a deep dive while listening to Ron Heifetz's keynote on authority, trust, and the challenges of inclusion. He began with identifying the dissonance and the cacophony that exist in the leadership field and called for more precise language, greater discipline in using it, and clarity and understanding of the basic principles of leadership. He believes that we need a more analytical vocabulary and must make finer distinctions between the meaning of authority and leadership. The former appears to be more transactional and technical. In relationship, the latter involves working with people who sometimes have the problem and are the problem. For those of us who were troubled by the cultural dynamics of the presidential race, he provided his reading of reality, saying people are feeling betrayed by those they authorized in exchange for addressing and solving their needs and their problems. And this feeling of betrayal has left them feeling distrustful of those in authority to ever meet their needs. And as a result, one of the greatest adaptive challenges that we face and are left with is the rebuilding of trust. There was no scheduled time in the conference to address the angst and pain that many of us felt, and that I believe is induced by the possibility that this same sense of betrayal could lead so many people to elect someone who has exploited their fears and sense of alienation and given voice to hatred and nearly every ism that divides us all. Fortunately, there were spaces like the reflection writing session in between the vast array of ILA offerings in which some of us found one another, made vital connections, and engaged in deep, deep work. And the hope is that we will be intentional in making space for such issues when we are in Brussels. Throughout this conference, I have heard authentic, courageous conversations, creative ideas being affirmed and challenged, new questions raised and seriously considered, and vulnerability shown. The same level of vulnerability we saw George Papandreou's, former Prime Minister of Greece, who took us to a deeper sharing of his story and reminded us of the concern for the state of politics globally. And his relationship is what drew him here today. I treasure his revelation of self-discovery and of claiming a different way of leading. This to me was a powerful example of the specialness of ILA in bringing together a scholar and a very skilled practitioner who can make significant change in this world. It was a superb example. When we are seen and heard, when we make visible the invisible, we can breathe, we can let go, we can listen and experience the movement from intolerance to acceptance, from anxiety to centeredness, from being cut off to being included. And as George said, when you serve your own soul, you can serve the souls of others. As always, we have celebrated and recognized the giants in our field, and this year's Lifetime Leadership Legacy recipients are true pioneers with a compelling purpose and a body of impressive work. We have experienced the melody, harmony, and the cacophony of our work together, work that began with a march and drum beats that would have been banned in this state during slavery, but are now signs of freedom and inclusion. I will end with some excerpts from a sermon delivered in Atlanta by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, February the 4th, 1968. He said, "Let us look calmly and honestly at ourselves, and we will discover that we too have the same basic desires for recognition. We all want to lead the parade. It is good to seek achievement, to want to lead, if it is not distorted or perverted, if it is tempered with love, morality, generosity, and service. Yes, we all aspire to be drum majors, but let us be drum majors for justice." And I can only add, let us be drum majors for justice, for truth, peace, and for inclusive leadership.
We came to Atlanta at a time when the obviously misnamed World Series played to a nail-biting finish. We came to Atlanta at a time when the obviously insane American election has us still biting those nails into stubs. We are worried. The world is worried, as history is strewn with men who gain power with which they create havoc. We huddled for 3.5 days in conference rooms and bar rooms that created a mental haven in which to focus on the alchemy between leaders and followers and context, determined to keep looking for the keys to the puzzles of who and why, of how and when. The puzzles that have intrigued us from the birth of this hopeful organization. We were welcomed by this city called Atlanta, its outstretched arms including us as we included each other in this parade of investigations, communications, and yes, libations. Our opening speaker in this city called Atlanta grew up only 4 doors from Dr. King. Our conference theme of inclusiveness makes us all Dr. King's neighbors. In the warmth of Wednesday evening, 1,000 of us walked to the jewel of Atlanta, the Center for Human and Civil Rights, symbolically connecting ourselves with marchers that have transformed this city, this country, this world. To the fierce drumming of ecstatic black and white women on their congas, we entered a preserve to the human spirit. No ordinary museum, this monument required us to see our reflections in dark mirrors and confront the eyes of those who shifted history through the behaviors most dear to us, those of principled leadership and of brave, committed followership. The stage was set for our days of presentation, elucidation, conversation, contemplation, evaluation, innovation, and candy at break times. We were surprised in a temple of leadership to hear the virtues of authority, a call to renew trust in authority despite past betrayals. Leadership is on the line. It needs to deliver. Followership is on the line. It needs to deliver. Relationship is on the line. We need to dance. And all the while, the world swirls around us with waves of refugees, surging seas, decaying trust, crumbling infrastructures, and rising carbon levels. As we prepare to leave this fertile space and continue our conversations and investigations, we ask and ask again, leadership for what? We will each go back to better prepared. We will finish our semesters, our dissertations, our articles and books, our projects and consultations, and then we can step back and each ask ourselves, how do we create inclusiveness? How do we bring in the marginalized, the other, whomever they may be to us, the neighbor 4 doors down, so that when we convene again to explore the task of leadership in a turbulent world, we have learned lessons and built bridges on which we can anchor ourselves to cast lines to those floundering in the seas and all together avoid the whirlpool of chaos. Thank you.
You're our poet in residence. And now I'd like to invite Janet Reckman up, who is the chair of this wonderful conference, and she will close it out for us.
Hello, everybody, and I'm about to say goodbye. At the ILA board meeting last Tuesday, the agenda was running long, so Chair Catherine Tyler Scott asked me to deliver a 5-minute report on the 18th Global Conference. I said that was impossible, that indeed the report on the 18th Global Conference would take the next 4 days. So at last my report is finished, and I hope you all agree that the conference team has done an outstanding job in setting the stage for our exploration of the dynamics of inclusive leadership. Let's give one last round of applause to show our appreciation for the conference team, the reviewers, the presenters, the keynotes, the ILA board and staff, the student volunteers, the people here at the Regency Hyatt House, and the colleagues who shared our commitment to the study, practice, and learning of leadership for the greater good. Go for it. And I now declare the 18th Global Conference of the International Leadership Association adjourned. Thank you all for your participation, and I'll see you all in Brussels.